Daniel had grown so accustomed to Sophie's crying that the silence frightened him more. His 3-year-old daughter sat motionless on the living room floor, clutching the yellow blanket her mother had crocheted during pregnancy. The apartment felt cavernous without Emma's presence, without her voice calling from the kitchen or her laughter filling the spaces between them. It had been 6 weeks since the accident. 6 weeks of relatives bearing casseroles, of whispered condolences, of a toddler who alternated between inconsolable wails and this new, terrifying quiet. Daniel's mother had stayed the first month, but she had her own life to return to. His friends tried, but what could they say? They had living wives, intact families, ordinary problems. He knelt beside Sophie, his knees protesting against the hardwood Emma had insisted they refinish together. "Sophie Bug," he whispered, using Emma's nickname. Nothing. Her blue eyes, so like her mother's, stared past him toward the window where afternoon light pooled on the floor. The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent. Daniel considered ignoring it, but Sophie's eyes flickered with something like interest. He opened the door to find Mrs. Chen from 4B, holding a container of soup and wearing an expression that wasn't pity. He'd seen pity. This was something else. "You don't know me well," she said without preamble, her accent thick, but her words deliberate. "But I know that look. I know that silence. May I come in?" Daniel stepped aside, too exhausted to refuse. Mrs. Chen walked directly to Sophie, lowering herself to the floor with surprising grace for her 70-something years. She didn't try to touch the child or speak to her. She simply sat, her own presence a quiet statement. "My daughter was 4, Mrs. Chen said, not looking at Daniel, but at Sophie. "When my husband died, she stopped talking for 3 months. Everyone had advice. Everyone said, 'Give her time, she'll be fine.' But no one understood. They hadn't lived through it." Sophie's fingers loosened slightly on the blanket. "I'm Margaret," Mrs. Chen continued, finally meeting Daniel's eyes. "And I think perhaps we can help each other remember what it means to be alive again." Margaret arrived the next morning at 7, carrying a bag of groceries and an air of determination. Daniel answered the door in yesterday's shirt, Sophie attached to his leg like a barnacle. He'd managed 3 hours of sleep between Sophie's nightmares and his own. "You need routines," Margaret announced, sweeping past him into the kitchen. "Routines give children safety. Adults too." Daniel watched, bemused, as she unpacked eggs, rice, vegetables he couldn't name. "I don't remember inviting." "You didn't. But Sophie needs breakfast, and so do you." She assessed his kitchen with a critical eye. Emma kept things organized. "You're drowning." The use of Emma's name, so casual and unafraid, made Daniel's throat tighten. Everyone else avoided it, as if speaking her name would shatter him further. But Margaret was already pulling out pans, turning on the stove. "Sit," she commanded. Daniel sat, Sophie still clinging to him. "When Lee died, my husband, I forgot how to eat. Food tasted like cardboard. My daughter, May, she was so small. I fed her, but I forgot myself. One day, my neighbor found me fainted in the hallway." She cracked eggs into a bowl with practiced efficiency. "Grief is selfish. It wants to consume everything. But you have Sophie. Sophie has you. This is both harder and easier than grieving alone." The smell of cooking filled the kitchen, ginger, sesame oil, something bright and living. Sophie's head lifted slightly. Margaret noticed, a small smile crossing her face. "When did you lose him?" Daniel asked quietly. 32 years ago. May was 4. We were new to America, barely speaking English. Lee worked construction. A beam fell. Her hands never stopped moving, whisking, pouring, stirring. They said he died instantly, as if that makes it hurt less. She slid a plate in front of Daniel, fried rice with eggs, simple but perfect. Then a smaller plate for Sophie, the rice formed into the shape of a bear. Sophie's eyes widened. "Mama made bears," she whispered, her first words in days. "I know," Margaret said softly. "Your mama knew that love lives in small things. We'll help your daddy remember." Daniel's hands shook as he lifted his fork. The rice was warm, savory, alive. He hadn't realized how much he'd been starving. Margaret insisted they go outside. Daniel resisted. The thought of neighbors' sympathetic looks, of playground memories saturated with Emma's ghost, felt insurmountable. But Margaret was relentless. Sophie needs sunshine.
So do you.
Hiding helps no one. They compromised on early morning, before the playground filled. Margaret met them at the park entrance, carrying a thermos and 3 cups. Sophie held Daniel's hand with crushing intensity, her other hand clutching the yellow blanket she now refused to leave behind. The playground equipment stood silent in the dawn light. Daniel remembered Emma pushing Sophie on those swings last summer, her red sundress bright against the sky. His chest constricted. "Not the playground," Margaret said, reading his face. "This way." She led them to a bench overlooking the pond, where ducks paddled through morning mist. She poured something from the thermos, tea, fragrant with jasmine. Sophie perched between them, watching the water with unusual focus. "May loved ducks," Margaret said. "After Lee died, we came here every morning, 6 a.m. before school. She wouldn't talk, but she'd count them. 1 duck, 2 ducks, 3 ducks. Some days just numbers. But it was something." Daniel sipped the tea. It was sweet, warming. Did she get better? Better?
No.
Different? Yes. Margaret threw breadcrumbs she'd brought, and ducks glided closer. Grief doesn't heal like a broken bone. It rearranges you. You become someone new. The question is, who do you want that person to be? Sophie suddenly pointed. 7 ducks. Both adults froze. Margaret's hand found Daniel's, squeezed briefly. 7 ducks, she confirmed. Shall we count tomorrow? See if they all come back. Sophie nodded, a small movement, but deliberate. Daniel felt something crack in his chest, not breaking further, but breaking open. A sliver of light entering darkness. "Margaret, why are you doing this? You barely know us." She watched the ducks, her profile serene. "When Lee died, a stranger helped me. Mrs. Kowalski from the 4th floor. She was widowed too. She sat with me while May slept. She didn't talk much. Just sat. One night, I asked her the same question. You know what she said? What? Because someone sat with me. Now I sit with you. Someday, you'll sit with someone else. This is how we survive, Daniel. We carry each other." Margaret arrived carrying a shoebox, its lid secured with a rubber band. Sophie was having a bad morning. She'd woken screaming from a nightmare, calling for Emma, and nothing Daniel did could comfort her. He felt like a failure, an imposter playing at single parenthood. "Today is hard," Margaret observed, setting down the box. "Hard days come. They will keep coming. But we meet them." She opened the box. Inside were photographs, letters, small objects Daniel couldn't identify from across the room. Sophie's crying quieted to hiccups. "This is my memory box," Margaret explained, settling on the floor. "After Lee died, people said I should put away his things. Move on, they said. But May needed to remember her papa. I needed to remember my husband. So we made this." She pulled out a photograph, a young man in construction clothes, grinning at the camera. Lee loved terrible jokes. The kind that make you groan. May doesn't remember his jokes anymore, but I do. I write them down. Sophie crept closer, dragging her blanket. She pointed at the photo. "That's your daddy?"
Yes.
"He died when I was very sad, like your daddy is sad now. But keeping his things here." Margaret tapped the box. It helped. "Would you like to make one for your mama?" Daniel's immediate instinct was no. Emma's things were still everywhere. Her coffee mug in the dish drainer, her coat on the hook, her pillows still holding the faint scent of her shampoo. Touching them, organizing them, felt like erasing her. But Sophie was nodding, her face more animated than Daniel had seen in weeks. Margaret met his eyes. Not about putting her away. About keeping her close in a way Sophie can hold. They spent the morning gathering items. Sophie chose Emma's favorite scarf, purple with small flowers. A photograph from their wedding. Emma's reading glasses. A ticket stub from a movie they'd seen as a family. Each item went into a shoebox Margaret had brought empty, knowing somehow this would be needed. "Can I add things?" Sophie asked, her voice small but present. "Always," Margaret said. "Memory boxes grow. Like love. Never gets smaller, just changes shape." Daniel held Emma's scarf to his face, breathing in fading traces of her perfume. Tears came, but they felt different. Not drowning, but cleansing. "Thank you," he whispered. Margaret's hand found his shoulder. "You're doing better than you know." Daniel prided himself on independence. He'd always been the helper, never the helped. But single fatherhood and grief had demolished his capabilities. The laundry piled up, bills went unpaid, and he'd served Sophie cereal for dinner 3 nights running. When Margaret offered to watch Sophie while he caught up, his instinct was to refuse. "I can manage," he said automatically, standing in his disaster of a living room. Margaret raised an eyebrow.
Can you?
"Or are you so afraid of appearing weak that you'd rather drown?" The words stung, because they were true. "I'm her father. I should be able to." "Should." Margaret interrupted. "Dangerous word. Lee and we had such pride when we came here. We would accept no charity, no help. We would prove ourselves strong." Her voice softened. "That pride nearly killed me after he died. I couldn't ask for help. Couldn't admit I was drowning. Mrs. Kowalski, she didn't ask permission. She just showed up." Sophie was playing with blocks in the corner, building precarious towers and knocking them down. Simple play, but the first time she'd shown interest in toys since Emma's death. "What if I can't do this?" Daniel's voice cracked. "What if I'm not enough for her? You think Emma did it alone? Parenting is never one person. It takes community. You have lost your partner, but that doesn't mean you must be alone." Margaret moved to the couch, began folding the laundry scattered there. "Let me tell you a secret. Accepting help is not weakness. It is wisdom." Daniel watched her fold Sophie's tiny shirts with practiced precision. "When May was small, who helped you?" "Mrs. Kowalski. Then Mrs. Patel. Then the teacher at May's school. Then the librarian who noticed May loved books. Then the coach of her soccer team." Margaret smiled at the memory. "I learned. It takes village, yes, but you must let village in." Sophie brought a block to Margaret, offering it shyly. Margaret accepted it gravely, placing it atop her stack of folded clothes. Sophie giggled. The sound so unexpected, so precious, that Daniel felt his chest might burst. "Okay," he said quietly. "Will you watch her Saturday? I need to deal with Emma's insurance paperwork. I keep starting and falling apart." "Yes, this is normal." Margaret squeezed his hand. "Saturday. All day. We'll count ducks and make dumplings. You handle business. This is how it works." Sophie's nightmares grew worse before they got better. Daniel would wake to her screams, rush to her room, and find her inconsolable. "Mama's gone. Mama's gone." Nothing he said helped. He felt helpless, useless. At 3 a.m. on a Tuesday, he called Margaret. "I'm sorry, I know it's late. I'm coming." She arrived 20 minutes later in a bathrobe, carrying a worn book. Sophie was still crying, her face red and blotchy. Margaret sat on the bed and opened the book, a collection of Chinese folktales, the pages soft with age. "This was May's," she said, not to Daniel, but to Sophie. "When nightmares came, we read stories. Not happy stories. Stories about hard things. Because sometimes pretending everything is happy makes sadness bigger." She began reading a tale about a girl who lost her mother and journeyed to the moon to find her. The imagery was strange, beautiful, melancholy. Sophie's crying gradually stilled, her attention caught by Margaret's lilting voice. "Did she find her mama?" Sophie asked when the story ended. "In a way," Margaret said carefully. "She found that her mama's love lived in her own heart. She carried it always." "But that's not the same," Sophie said, and Daniel heard Emma's logic in her voice, clear, unflinching. "No," Margaret agreed. "Not the same. And anyone who says it is, they haven't lost someone. but it's what we have. The love doesn't disappear. Just the person's body. Daniel sat on the floor beside the bed, listening. No one had explained it to him this way. Everyone offered platitudes. She's in a better place. Time heals all wounds. But Margaret offered truth. My mama's body is gone?
Sophie asked. Yes.
But her love? Here. Margaret touched Sophie's chest. And here. Her finger moved to Sophie's head. In memories. In things she taught you. In ways you're like her. Sophie considered this. I have her eyes. You do. Beautiful eyes. And Daddy says I'm stubborn like her. Margaret laughed softly. Stubborn is good. Stubborn keeps you standing when life knocks you down. Sophie's eyes grew heavy. Will you read another? Always. Margaret began another tale, and Sophie drifted to sleep mid-story. In the kitchen afterward, Daniel made tea. How did you know what to say? Trial and error. Many mistakes. But I learned. Children need truth. Gentle truth, but truth. Pretending doesn't help. I keep trying to protect her from the pain. You can't. Pain is here. But you can teach her how to carry it. Margaret announced they were baking cookies. Daniel, who'd burned toast that morning, protested. I'm not exactly a cook. Neither was I. But May needed normal things. Baking is normal. Also, you'll mess up, and Sophie needs to see that messing up is okay. They assembled in Margaret's apartment, which smelled like ginger and old books. Her kitchen was tiny but immaculate. She'd laid out ingredients with precision: flour, sugar, butter, eggs. Emma was the baker, Daniel said, staring at the ingredients. She made these elaborate birthday cakes. I was always just the taste tester. And now you learn. Emma taught Sophie many things. You'll teach her different things. This is okay. Margaret handed Sophie a small apron. Today, we make disaster cookies. Disaster cookies?
Sophie asked.
Cookies that don't turn out perfect. Because perfect is boring and also impossible. They began. Daniel measured flour incorrectly, creating a cloud that coated the counter. Sophie added too much salt. Margaret let it all happen, offering guidance but no judgment. The dough was lumpy, the shapes uneven. When they went into the oven, Daniel was certain they'd be inedible. But they emerged golden, imperfect, and when he tasted one, surprisingly good. See, Margaret said. Not perfect, but good. Sometimes, good enough is exactly enough. Sophie decorated hers with icing, creating abstract patterns. Can we bring some to Mama? She asked suddenly. The question hung in the air. Daniel opened his mouth, unsure what to say. Margaret knelt beside Sophie. We could bring them to where Mama is buried. Leave them as a gift. What do you think? Sophie nodded seriously. She liked cookies. That afternoon, they drove to the cemetery. Daniel hadn't returned since the funeral. Couldn't bear it. But with Margaret and Sophie beside him, it felt possible. They stood before Emma's grave, and Sophie carefully placed 3 misshapen cookies on the stone. I made these, Mama. They're not perfect, but Margaret says that's okay. Daniel's tears fell freely. Margaret's arm slipped through his. See, she whispered. You're teaching her. How to grieve. How to remember. How to keep living. This is good parenting. It doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But it is. May came to visit from Seattle, and Daniel finally met the daughter Margaret spoke of so often. She was in her 30s, confident, with her mother's eyes and a ready smile. She hugged Margaret, then turned to Daniel with knowing sympathy. So you're the one Mom's adopted, May said warmly. She has a habit of collecting strays. May, Margaret scolded, but she was smiling. Over dinner, Margaret insisted on cooking for everyone. Daniel watched the easy affection between mother and daughter. They teased each other, finished each other's sentences, shared private jokes. Something in his chest ached. After Sophie went to bed, May pulled him aside. I wanted to thank you, she said quietly. Thank me? Your mother's been saving my life. And you're giving her purpose. After Dad died, she poured everything into me. But I grew up, moved away. She's been lonely, though she'd never admit it. May glanced toward the kitchen where Margaret was washing dishes. Sophie and you've given her grandmothering she thought she'd never have. Daniel hadn't considered it from that angle. She never remarried, never even dated. She said she had her great love. Some people do that, love once completely. May paused. She talks about you too constantly. How Sophie is learning to laugh again. How you're learning to ask for help. You've become her purpose. Later, watching Margaret read to Sophie, Daniel saw it clearly. Margaret wasn't just helping them, they were helping her. Grief had isolated her as much as it had isolated him. This unexpected friendship had given them all something to hold on to. Margaret, he said after Sophie slept. May told me something tonight. That I'm meddling? Yes, I know. That we've given you purpose. But I think you've given us more. You've given Sophie a grandmother. One who understands loss. Who doesn't look at us with pity. Margaret's eyes glistened. My great regret, no grandchildren. May chose career over family. I understood, but still, to have Sophie call me Grandma Margaret even just sometimes. She dabbed her eyes. You have given me an unexpected gift too. Then we're even.
No.
We're family. Different than even. Better. As months passed, a new rhythm emerged. Thursday mornings were duck counting at the park. Saturday afternoons were baking disasters. Sunday evenings, Margaret joined them for dinner, bringing stories and laughter that filled the apartment's empty spaces. Sophie started preschool, a milestone that terrified Daniel. What if she couldn't cope? What if other children asked about her mother? But Margaret had prepared them both. She'll tell them the truth, Margaret had said. My mama died. Some children won't understand, but her truth is her strength. The first day, Sophie wore the purple scarf, Emma's scarf, around her neck like armor. She held Daniel's hand, her grip firm. I'm brave, she announced. Mama was brave. You're brave. Grandma Margaret says we're all brave. In the classroom, the teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, greeted them with gentle warmth. Daniel had emailed ahead, explaining their situation. He worried it would make Sophie seem broken, different. But Ms. Rodriguez knelt to Sophie's level. I love your scarf. Purple is powerful. It was my mama's. She died, but I keep her things close. Sophie said it matter-of-factly, the way Margaret had taught her. That's beautiful. Would you like to tell me about her sometime? Sophie considered. Maybe. When I'm ready. Walking home alone, Daniel felt the weight of the milestone. Sophie was growing, adapting, surviving. But she was also growing away, toward independence, toward a life that would eventually need him less. That evening, Margaret found him crying in the kitchen. She did so well today, he managed. Emma would be so proud. And I realized she'll never know. Emma will never see Sophie's first day of school, her graduation, her wedding. All these moments, and Emma's missing them. Margaret sat beside him, letting him weep. When he'd exhausted himself, she spoke. Emma isn't seeing them with her eyes. But you carry Emma. Sophie carries Emma. In how you love her, how you raise her, Emma is present. Not the way you wish, but present nonetheless. Is that enough? Some days, yes. Some days, no. This is the reality. But Daniel, you're doing it. Against impossible odds, you're raising this beautiful child. Emma would be proud of you too. That night, Sophie climbed into his bed, a new habit since Emma's death. Daddy, do you think Mama knows I was brave today? Daniel pulled her close. I think wherever Mama is, she's cheering for you. Grandma Margaret says love doesn't die. Grandma Margaret is very wise. Daddy, I'm glad we have her. Me too, Sophie Bug. Me too. A year after Emma's death, Daniel stood in the kitchen making breakfast. Actual breakfast, not cereal, when he realized something had shifted. Sophie was singing in her room, a silly song about dinosaurs. The apartment no longer felt haunted by absence, but filled with new life. Different but real. Margaret arrived for their Thursday morning ritual, and Sophie bounded to the door. Grandma Margaret. I got new rain boots. They're red. Perfect for puddle jumping, Margaret approved. Shall we see if the ducks enjoy rain? At the park, under a light drizzle, they counted ducks, 11 today, and shared banana bread Margaret had made. Sophie chased a duck, laughing when it waddled away indignantly. A sound so ordinary, so precious. She stopped crying, Daniel said quietly.
Yes.
Though she'll cry again. For her mother, for other hurts. But she's learned crying isn't all she is. You did that. We did that. You, me, Sophie herself. Healing is always collective work. Daniel watched his daughter splash in puddles, her yellow blanket safely at home now, no longer a constant companion. I don't know how to thank you. You appeared in our lives when we were drowning. And you let me be grandmother again. We saved each other, Daniel. This is what I tried to tell you from the beginning. Grief is terrible, but it doesn't have to be solitary. Sophie ran back, muddy and delighted. Can we get hot chocolate? Obviously, Daniel said, lifting her onto his shoulders. Grandma Margaret's treat. I don't recall offering. Too late, you're stuck with us now, Daniel teased, and Margaret laughed, the sound bright and free. Walking home, Sophie between them holding both their hands, Daniel felt Emma's absence, sharp still, always there. But he also felt presence, Sophie's small hand in his, Margaret's steady friendship, the possibility of joy coexisting with sorrow. That night, Sophie asked for her memory box. They looked through it together, Daniel telling stories about Emma. Sophie added a new treasure, a feather she'd found at the park. For Mama's collection, she explained. Emma had loved collecting small beautiful things. Can we tell her about Grandma Margaret? Sophie asked. What would you tell her? Sophie thought carefully. That when you were sad, someone helped us. That Grandma Margaret taught us to be brave. That she makes really good dumplings. And that even though I miss Mama every day, I can be happy too. Both things together. Daniel's throat tightened. That's exactly right, Sophie Bug. Both things together. Later, after Sophie slept, Daniel called Margaret. Thank you. For everything. For showing up. For staying. For teaching me that accepting help isn't weakness. And thank you for letting me be part of your family. For giving me purpose. For reminding me that love has room to grow. Always. They talked until midnight, sharing stories, making plans for the future. When Daniel finally hung up, he stood at Sophie's door, watching her sleep peacefully, her small chest rising and falling. Emma was gone. That would always be true, always hurt. But they were surviving. More than surviving. They were building a life with room for both grief and joy, loss and love, endings and beginnings. Sophie had stopped crying. But more than that, she'd learned to live fully in a world that held both sorrow and wonder. And Daniel had learned that sometimes, the people who save us are the ones we least expect, strangers who become family, teaching us that healing is never a solo journey. Tomorrow they would count ducks again. They would bake imperfect cookies and tell stories and hold each other through hard moments. They would remember Emma while building new memories. This was their life now, not the one they'd planned, but the one they had. And it was, in its imperfect, hard-won way, enough.